Los Angeles, sometime in the late 1970s. A broken man sits on a bench outside a bus station. He's wearing a faded army jacket, a Vietnam veteran, forgotten by his country, forgotten by everyone. A Cadillac pulls over. The window rolls down. The man inside is the most famous actor on earth. But that's not why he stops. He stops because nobody else did. What happens next will never make the newspapers. It won't appear in any biography. For decades, almost no one will know this story even happened. Because Marlon Brando didn't do it for fame. He didn't do it for headlines. He did it because in that moment he saw something nobody else wanted to see. And what he did for that veteran would change both of their lives forever. Here is the story. Hollywood in the 1970s. The smell of exhaust and jasmine. Sunset Boulevard buzzing with tourists searching for movie star glimpses. Studios churning out blockbusters. Magazines filled with celebrity gossip and glamour. This was the kingdom of illusion. A place where image was everything. Where the rich drove past the poor without slowing down. Where homeless veterans sat invisible on street corners while limousines carried stars to premieres. America had just lost its first war. The boys who came home from Vietnam came back to a nation that didn't want to look at them. No parades, no welcome home. Many of them ended up on the streets, broken, discarded. The government that sent them to war couldn't be bothered to give them a home. And in the middle of all this sat Marlon Brando, the biggest name in cinema, the man who had just reminded the world of his genius in The Godfather. To the public, Brando was a legend. Don Vito Corleone, Stanley Kowalski, the embodiment of masculine power and artistic brilliance. But the man behind those performances, he was someone else entirely. By the 1970s, Brando had become disillusioned with fame. He once said that acting was just lying for a living. He despised the worship, the attention, the photographers who followed him everywhere. His friend Ellen Adler, daughter of his beloved acting teacher, Stella Adler, said that Brando spent his whole life trying to run away from fame. But of course he couldn't. What most people didn't know was that Brando had been quietly giving away money for years. Not for publicity, not for tax breaks, just because he couldn't stand watching people suffer. He paid for funerals of poor strangers. He sent random kids to university. He covered medical bills for people he'd never met. He once gave away an entire Cadillac to someone who needed it more than him. His daughter Rebecca would later say, in the end, he only made money so he could help fight injustices. But here's what nobody knew. Brando had been watching the veterans, the men who shuffled past his car windows, the hollow eyes, the 1,000-yard stares, the men America wanted to forget. He saw them, and he couldn't look away, because Marlon Brando understood something about being broken, about carrying wounds that don't heal, about the silence that follows trauma. And somewhere in Los Angeles, on a day that would never make the history books, Brando was about to cross paths with a man who had given everything for his country and received nothing in return. What happened between them would stay secret for decades. The question is, why? What really happened? And why did Brando never speak about it? To understand why this encounter mattered so much, you need to understand something about Marlon Brando's relationship with trauma. Brando grew up in a broken home. His father was cold and distant. His mother was an alcoholic who would disappear for days. As a boy, Marlon would sometimes have to go searching through local bars to find her and bring her home. That childhood left scars that never fully healed. But it also gave him something else, an ability to see pain in others, a radar for suffering that most people learn to tune out. Karl Malden, his co-star from On the Waterfront, once said that Brando was always worried about the little guys on the bottom, all over the world. And in the 1970s, there was no one more at the bottom than Vietnam veterans. These men had been sent to fight in a war nobody wanted. They came home to protesters who spat at them, to a government that offered nothing, to families who didn't know how to talk to them anymore. Many ended up homeless, living under bridges, sleeping in doorways, invisible to a society that just wanted to move on. Brando couldn't move on. He had been involved in civil rights since the 1960s. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He donated money to the Black Panthers. He stood up for Native Americans when nobody else would, famously refusing his Oscar for The Godfather and sending activist Sachin Littlefeather to speak in his place. But his work with veterans was different. It was quieter, more personal. He would visit VA hospitals in wheelchairs, pretending to be a patient just to spend time with wounded soldiers without the circus of celebrity. He would sit with them for hours, listen to their stories about friends who didn't make it home, about nightmares that never stopped, about feeling like ghosts in their own country. Here's the question that haunted him. How do you help someone when they've lost everything? Not just their home, not just their health, but their faith in the country they served. Quick question for you watching this. Have you ever felt invisible, like the world just moved on without you, like your sacrifice meant nothing to the people you sacrificed for? Let us know in the comments. Then came the day. The exact date is lost to time. What we know comes from fragments, from people who were there, from stories that surfaced decades later when those involved finally felt safe to talk. Brando was driving through Los Angeles, alone, no entourage, no publicist, just a man in his car, and then he saw him, a veteran, sitting outside a bus station, the army jacket, the distant look. Something made Brando stop. He didn't just drive by, he didn't just feel bad for a moment and then forget. He pulled over. Years later, when this story finally came to light, someone close to Brando described that moment simply. Marlon saw himself in that man. He saw what he could have become if nobody had ever believed in him. What nobody expected was what would happen next, because Marlon Brando wasn't just going to give this man some money and drive away. He was going to do something far more radical. Something that would cost him over $50,000. Something that would change both of their lives. And something that he would never, ever want anyone to know about. The veteran's name has been protected for decades. Let's call him James. James had served 2 tours in Vietnam. He'd seen things that would haunt him forever. When he came home in 1971, his wife had left. His family had scattered. The jobs dried up because nobody wanted to hire one of those guys. Within 3 years, James had lost everything. Now here he was, sitting outside a bus station with nowhere to go, and Marlon Brando just pulled up in a Cadillac. At first, James didn't recognize him. Brando had grown heavier since his Godfather days. He was wearing a baseball cap. Sunglasses. "You served?" Brando asked through the window. James nodded. "Where?" "Da Nang, Khe San." Silence. Pure silence. Brando got out of the car. But to understand what happened next, you need to understand something about how Brando operated. This wasn't his first time doing something like this. There are documented cases of Brando's secret generosity throughout the 1970s and 1980s. In November 1987, he walked into LA County Hospital and anonymously paid $22,000 in medical bills for a complete stranger. The patient didn't find out who their benefactor was until years later. In 1976, he showed up at a Los Angeles courtroom where an elderly black couple was about to lose the home they'd lived in for 32 years due to a clerical error. Brando paid $50,000 to save their house. And he left $25,000 hidden in the walls for them to find later. By some accounts, Brando spent over $200,000 in the 1970s alone buying houses for 5 families facing unjust foreclosures. He never wanted credit. He never wanted attention. In fact, he made the recipients promise to never reveal his name. Why? Because for Brando, the moment you talk about charity, it stops being charity. It becomes publicity. Back at the bus station, Brando sat down next to James, not in his car, not in a position of power. He sat on the bench. Eye to eye, they talked. Hours passed. Brando learned about Da Nang, about the friends James had watched die, about the wife who couldn't handle who he'd become, about the government that promised help and delivered nothing. And James learned something too. This famous actor, this man who had everything, understood something about pain, about being betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, about carrying wounds that don't show on the outside. At some point, Brando asked the question that changed everything. Where do you live? James didn't answer at first. He just looked down. Nowhere, he finally said. I live nowhere? Brando didn't say anything for a long time. Then, how would you like to change that? James thought it was a joke, some Hollywood rich guy playing games. But Brando's eyes were serious. I'm going to find you a house, Brando said, and I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to put your name on it, and you're never going to live nowhere again. This is the part that was kept secret for decades. Did you catch why? Because Brando didn't want anyone to know, not for modesty, but because he understood something profound. The moment help becomes a performance, it loses its power to heal. Over the next few weeks, Brando kept his promise. He worked with a lawyer, found a small house in a working-class neighborhood, paid cash, put James's name on the deed. But here's what really mattered. It wasn't the house. It was the fact that Marlon Brando kept showing up. He visited James. He checked on him. He made sure James had what he needed to rebuild, not just a roof, but a foundation, a connection, a reminder that somebody in this world gave a damn. James later told someone close to him, "That man didn't just give me a house. He gave me back my belief that people can be good." And in that moment, everything changed. Not for Brando's image. Not for headlines. Not for anything the world would ever see. It changed because two broken men found each other, and in finding each other, they found something worth believing in again. James lived in that house for over 20 years. He got sober. He found work. He reconnected with what remained of his family. And he never told anyone who bought him that house. He kept his promise to Brando. Even when friends asked how a homeless veteran suddenly owned property, James just smiled and said, "An angel." Nobody knew it was the same angel who refused his Oscar, the same angel who kissed Larry King on national television, the same angel who was simultaneously one of Hollywood's greatest legends and one of its greatest mysteries. Brando never spoke publicly about James. He never mentioned him in his autobiography. He never brought cameras. He never sought recognition. He just did what he believed needed to be done. And then he moved on. So why was this kept quiet for so long? Because that's how Brando operated. The people who knew him best described a man with two faces. The public Brando was eccentric, difficult, unpredictable. He once punched a photographer and broke his jaw. He made directors wait for hours while he prepared for scenes. But the private Brando, he was different. His friend and co-star said that Brando treated everyone, from his bodyguards and staff to complete strangers, with absolute respect. He was known for spontaneous acts of immense generosity, giving away cars, paying for surgeries, funding education for kids he'd never meet. Was it coincidence that so many of these acts involved veterans, the marginalized, the forgotten? Or was there something deeper? Some believe Brando saw himself in the discarded. He never served in the military. He was classified 4F due to a bad knee from a football injury. But perhaps that rejection gave him a special understanding of men who served and came back to nothing. This story only surfaced years after Brando died in 2004. The people who knew, the lawyers who processed the paperwork, the family members who finally felt safe to speak. Pieces of the puzzle came together slowly, and what emerged was a portrait of a man far more complex than any role he ever played. Not a saint. Brando had his darkness, his failed marriages, his family tragedies, his contradictions, but beneath all of it was a heart that ached for the suffering of others. A man who, as his daughter said, only made money so he could fight injustice. So here's the question that lingers. Was Brando's generosity an act of redemption, an attempt to balance his own complicated legacy, or was it simply who he was when the cameras stopped rolling? Let us know what you think in the comments. In the end, Marlon Brando's greatest performance wasn't on any screen. It was in the moments nobody filmed, the hours spent with a homeless veteran, the houses bought for strangers, the medical bills paid in secret, the dignity restored to people the world had forgotten. This is what made Brando different from every other Hollywood legend. He didn't just play characters who fought for justice. He lived it, quietly, anonymously, without asking for anything in return. Carl Malden said it best. Brando was always worried about the little guys on the bottom, and that worry wasn't performance. It was who he was. James, the veteran Brando helped, passed away in the early 2000s. He died in his own home, surrounded by family with his dignity intact. That's Brando's real legacy, not the Oscars, not the fame, not even the iconic roles. It's the lives he changed when nobody was watching. The world remembers Marlon Brando as a genius, as an eccentric, as a troubled soul who gave us some of cinema's greatest moments. But for a homeless veteran sitting outside a bus station, Brando was something else entirely. He was proof that even in a world that forgets you, someone might still stop. Someone might still see you. Someone might still believe you deserve a chance. So here's the question for you. What would you do if you saw someone forgotten? Would you keep driving, or would you stop? And which untold Hollywood story should we explore next? The hidden truth about James Dean's final days, or the secret meeting between Brando and Muhammad Ali that nobody documented? Let us know in the comments. Hollywood forgot Marlon Brando's kindness, but we won't.